Okay, we're live. We're live. I'll be on later on today for Xenoblade Chronicles X around 6 p.m. But I figured I'd get a tier list going for as a redo of my first one I did a while back for the Sirocco job list. I'm Runner Storm 331, back to doing some more streaming briefly, but I will be back later on for Xenoblade Chronicles X, which will be getting ourselves ready for Chapter 13 and getting the rest of our party ready for that in general. But in the meantime, I do want to do a retake of my Poor Man's tier list, Storm's Poor Man's tier list for Final Fantasy V Sirocco job list. So if you're not familiar with the Sirocco job list, it's one of the two modes to play Four Job Fiesta. And this tier list goes over the jobs for the wind and fire crystals only. Now, you do have a chance of getting the water and earth crystal jobs when you go to water or fire, get the water and fire ones, but you're mostly going to be set with either wind or fire for the most part. So my recent tier list, run for the Sirocco, my first one, involved having a party of White Mage, Black Mage, Chemist, and this guy right here. So in my previous tier list, I actually listed Bard as the worst of the jobs. But after playing it on my recent playthrough, I decided to do a redo because the Bard's actually pretty decent. It's still on the low end, but actually more decent than most people tend to give it credit for. And I found out to my own mistake that this is actually the case. So as a result, we're going to be doing a redo of the tier list for Runner Storm's Poor Man's tier list for the Sirocco job tier list, I should say. And hopefully this will help players get into doing the Four Job Fiesta run as well as play Final Fantasy V. If you enjoy the content that I'm putting out, feel free to follow and sub the channel. Definitely helps it grow bit by bit. And I do Four Job Fiesta runs either mostly once a year. I will not be doing Geyser this year. I'll be saving that for next year, but I will do a tier list for that eventually. So keep an eye out for that sometime before the Four Job Fiesta season ends. And we're going to go ahead and get started. So the jobs I'll be covering on the tier list will be based on the categories of low, mid, and top tiers. So I'll be covering low tier first, then the mid ones, and then the top tier. So for the jobs that we have for the Sirocco run fall into the wind and fire job categories. So we get a total of 11 jobs to cover for this tier list. And I'll try to base them based on my personal experience, how well they do on a run, as well as their abilities, among other factors. And we're going to get started right now with the low tier. So kicking things off for the low tier, after my reassessment of the Bard, I'm going to consider Monk to be at the low end of the Sirocco tier list. And this is not to say the Monk is terrible in general. It does have some pretty useful abilities. Chakra actually should be notable for being a very good early healing ability, especially since that cures poison and darkness. Those are two common status elements that occur very early in the game, but its main draws are mostly barehanded and counter. They actually work more better with other jobs, but the problem is the Monk will only be serviceable as a fighter from World 1 up until mid-part of World 2. And then after X-Death's Castle into World 3, it kind of falls off as a damage dealer. It definitely needs something like Dancer to give it a massive power boost with Sword Dance, but even that can be a challenge in itself, especially on a Sirocco job list. And it's kind of hard to get Monk to be pretty decent in other synergize with other jobs in general other job abilities to go with this in general. But overall, it's still a decent fighter and has decent abilities. But unfortunately, when you compare it against other jobs, it's just at the very end of the Sirocco tier list, in my opinion. Decent fighter, but eventually falls off at the end. And you'll probably be putting barehanded on other warrior jobs, and counter could be assigned to other jobs like the Knight and Ninja. So in place of the Monk's second place on the low tier list is the Bard. It's still on the low tier list, but I consider that to be a little bit more stronger than the Monk in general. Of course, Geomancer, in my opinion, still beats Bard on the low tier list for being the top of the low tier. But Bard is actually very good job in terms of support, and it's also your go-to undead slayer for the most part, especially once it gets access to Rec Room in World 2. And later on, you'll get access to its best harp, the Apollo's harp. One thing to keep in mind about that weapon, that it doesn't really get a whole lot of coverage, is the fact that it covers, it can damage two different types of enemies, namely undead and dragons. So that's actually pretty big when you think about it, because you do fight some undead enemies in World 3, namely like Sandcrawler, and then of course you got some dragon enemies in the interdimensional rift that you can also fight that could make the Bard actually a pretty good damage dealer. Of course, it's not a very good damage dealer, and you're going to basically rely on its songs. Romeo's Ballad is actually pretty good at just about anything that's not immune to stop. You can also use Swift Song to Mana's Peon, Hero's Rim, and I forgot the one name of the song for the strength boosting. But if you can keep your Bard from getting physical attack, any of those songs can make your entire party insanely strong. In fact, if you're lucky enough to get the Knight, I recommend putting Bard on critical condition, protect and cover, and you can basically keep your Bard safe from physical attacks for the most part. But technically, the songs are kind of iffy in most parts, but Rec Room is definitely great when you get it in World 2, especially when you go to Drakenvale Vale in general. It'll be your undead slayer for the most part, especially when you get to places like Pyramid of Moor and anything that does have undead enemies. And Romeo's Ballad is actually pretty good. So if you get Bard and the stars align for Sirocco, you can like easily take on Omega, as long as all three party members use Sing to keep Omega stun locked on stop. And if you get lucky with the Mystic Knight on Sirocco, you can, and any job that could use Spellblades, you can definitely use this to beat Omega. But overall, this is pretty much one of the better support jobs. It's not very good in terms of damage, so this is another reason why I consider this to be on the second place on the low tier list. Now, at the top of the low tier list is Geomancer. Now, Geomancer's Gaia is actually pretty decent in general. It does come in handy against Acrovarius, if I say that correctly, at the end of World 1, the last boss you get to fight in that world. And it definitely hits pretty hard with wind attacks, but because of the fact you have to require to consistently level up your characters to get more abilities and attacks to go with Gaia, it definitely does require some massive investment towards building up your party's levels, though that's not a big deal for anyone that's doing it into grinding. But the Geomancer does have two good useful abilities, namely Find Pits, which will be very useful to have if you're going through the area and not knowing where the pits are. And Light Step is actually pretty useful for any area with damaging floors, like X's Castle, which has the lava, of course, the poison flowers from North Mountain. I'm assuming that it protects that, but I'm not positive. And if you're lucky enough to go into Great Serpent Trench, you can also use that to protect yourself from the lava. But Light Step only gets a few usages, and Gaia kind of falls off by the time you get into the final dungeons in the interdimensional rift. Not to mention you're kind of relying heavily on Wind Slash to damage Neo X stuff. Not to mention bells are reflectable, which also makes the Geomancer kind of on the low end, but it's actually a pretty decent mage job, but it just gets outclassed by so many others. Now we're moving on to the mid tier of the Sirocco tier list, and we're kicking things off with the Thief. The Thief is at the low end of the mid tier list, and it's got the highest agility of all the available jobs on the Sirocco run, but its main draw, its auto-initiated abilities. And of course, its ability to use Scram, which essentially allows you to run away from battles. You also get access to Steal, which allows you to get some pretty good equipment and items pretty early on, thanks to Thief's ability to steal items. But in my opinion, Sprint, Find Passages, and Vigilance are the real draws from the Thief. Vigilance essentially eliminates back attacks altogether as long as one party member remains a thief. You can also find passages a lot more easier with this. If you're not running Pixel Remaster and you need more walking speed, Sprint is very useful. Artful Dodger can also be transferable to other jobs that do not have very high agility, and they can definitely make full use of it. This is actually pretty good if you slap Artful Dodger with Bard, because Bard's harps are actually deal damage based on agility. So that means Curly and Ferris can make full use as Bards, since they can make full use of harp damage and take advantage of their very high agility. Combine that with the Thief, they can be pretty devastating somewhat. But it's still not a very high damage dealer. But Thief is actually a good support unit in terms of getting way good items and equipment, and items, equipment, weapons, etc. earlier on and later on too. Especially if you can get lucky and scoring the Time Mage here with the return spell. So Beastmaster would be the second end at the mid-tier list at the low end. It's actually not a... I don't consider it a very good job outside control, but if you do know... If you have a very good knowledge of Final Fantasy V's monsters and what they do upon releasing them, the Beastmaster is actually a pretty clutch job that can be useful in certain situations, especially with certain monsters like the Sandbear's Bear Claw, which does very high physical damage. Some of the dragons in World 2, if you capture those, can release some pretty devastating abilities. And it does have pretty good strength modifier, especially with the ability to equip whips and attack from back row and somewhat inflict paralysis. But at the same time, if you're not into capturing monsters, this might not be the job for anyone. And it definitely requires Blue Mage and Time Mage to make it actually worth using, in my opinion. That's because Time Mage has accessibility gravity spells, and your ultimate goal is to capture monsters. Usually you have to drop them down to either 1 HP if you don't have the Grad Kado, or whatever that's called, to ensure you capture them at half HP instead. And you also need Blue Mage's abilities like Scan and Check to see if how their HP is holding, to know when the proper time to capture it. This is actually a pretty decent warrior job, but I don't really consider this to be a very high level job on the Sirocco run. But those that do know how to use the catch and release system and know what attacks the monsters can use can really make full use of this. And like I said before, I consider it more of a clutch job and not a really high end of the mid tier, in my opinion. The White Mage is going to be your essential healer. It's not your best damaging job, since it can only use staves and flails. Not to mention the regular flails are consistently missed. Morningstar is actually its best weapon it can equip, but overall the White Mage's real function is to heal and assist the party. And if you're lucky enough to get Chemist or any other job that provides support like the Bard, you can definitely make it an ultimate support unit in addition to healing. But anyway, later in the game you'll get access to Holy, which will be one of your better damage dealers, along with the Sage Staff, one of the legendary 12 weapons. Equip that, and you can deal very high damage with Holy, with any White Mage equipped with that. Not to mention, you'll be able to keep your party healed up and keep them on their feet for the most part. It does have, like the Thief, it is definitely one of the more harder jobs to start off with in any Four Job Fiesta run, because you're stuck with staves and flails, and those are not very high damaging weapons. But once you get into the Water Crystal job and thereafter, and you get better jobs, the White Mage will transition to being one of your better healers, and essentially keeps the entire party alive for the most part. In just about any Four Job Fiesta run. Now, what would I consider to be the top of the mid tier? I did go over just about. Oh yeah, now I remember. I consider Ranger to be at the top of the mid tier, and that's because Ranger is actually a pretty decent damage dealer in the back row. Animals can be very useful if you know their abilities and what enemies are actually susceptible to them. The Ranger is actually probably a decent damage dealer from back row. Not to mention your mages can definitely equip the raw bow abilities, and you can basically use them to allow them to attack for full damage without having to sacrifice attack power. Of course, Ranger's big draw is Rapid Fire, which is acquired for mastery of the job, and giving it to any warrior job like the ninjas, monks, knights, or anything that can deal pretty decent high damage can definitely benefit from Rapid Fire in general. Overall, it's a very decent, fast job. It can definitely utilize harps as well for agility damage, among other things. But for the most part, the big prize is rapid fire. Even though it does have your attack damage, it definitely guarantees 100% accuracy. You also got to aim to ensure that your attacks do land. And overall, it's probably the more decent, if not better, job for the mid tier list. It just gets outclassed by other ones. So kicking off with the top tier, we'll start off with the knight. The knight is essentially your only tank option in the entire game. Of course, it does fall off quite early on, since since guarding and covering won't be nearly as useful. But two-handed is actually pretty decent in Four Job Fiesta runs. It allows them to transition to bit better damage dealers, and they're the only job that gets access to knight swords aside from freelancers, and they'll be very good damage dealers by the time you get into World 3, especially since that world, as well as late World 2, will start giving you access to knight swords, and you can. And even though the equip abilities that you get from this job aren't very useful, mages can definitely get more mileage with the equipped shields, because they can definitely improve their odds for evading attacks. Warriors like Monk and Ranger and Ninjas can definitely benefit from heavier armor for better protection. And of course, if you somehow get a Mystic Knight, they can benefit from equipped swords, because that probably lets them use Knight Swords, and Knight Swords actually have some of the best weapons in the entire game. And of course, the fact that they can equip Excalibur also makes them pretty dang good top tier jobs in a Four Job Fiesta. But unfortunately, its ability to tank is not going to be very good. But if you get this along with the Bard, you can definitely benefit from some of its more better songs. The Ninja, in my opinion, is probably the best warrior job in the entire Sirocco run. And this is because the Ninja has actually pretty decent modifiers. It ties with Mystic Knight for having the second highest agility in the entire game. Not to mention, just about every ability you get from this job is going to be useful. Smoke allows you to run away from battles. You also get access to Image, which is essentially a free blink without MP. That's good for mages or jobs that are not very high defensive. Throw, of course, benefits both physical and magic attackers, and you can definitely benefit from shurikens and Fuma shurikens, as well as your mages get benefits from using scrolls, and they deal Aga damage. And of course, getting access to dual wield allows you to basically turn most of your warrior jobs, like knights and anyone that can basically wield double weapons, into pretty decent high damage dealers. Combine that with rapid fire, you definitely get more mileage and piling up as much damage as possible. Though you do have to sacrifice some of your attack strength in general. But overall, I consider the Ninja to be the top warrior of the Sirocco run. Black Mage is second to being the best job in the Sirocco run tier list. This is because this has the second highest magic modifier in the entire game. Not to mention, its ability to capitalize on elemental weaknesses is going to be very useful from start up until near the end of World 3, which is near the end of the game. And of course, its accessibility to Flare is also going to be very useful, because you'll definitely take full advantage of hitting enemies for non-elemental damage. Its ability to inflict status elements like Silence and Sleep are going to be useful for some boss fights. And you can definitely get a lot of mileage with Black Mage overall with its ability to equip rods and break them, which means you'll get early access to Aga spells pretty early. And it stays that way up until you get into actual Aga spells itself and into World 3. And then finally, the job I consider to be at the top of the Sirocco run is the Blue Mage. Now, if you get Blue Mage, you're basically looking pretty darn good, because Blue Mage can basically gain a whole lot of abilities in this entire game. This is also the job where you basically, where this job initially debuts. So you can basically get not only early access to rod breaking, but you also get access to some good blue magic spells like Goblin Punch, Vampire, level 5 Death, level 3 Flare, Mind Blast, Death Claw, Aqua Breath, White Wind, and Mighty Guard, just to name a few of those abilities. In fact, Blue Mage is like virtually broken in this entire game in general. Because you got a lot of options to use. If you have enemies that are susceptible to sleep and old, they can be hit with time slip as well. Of course, you also have access to the arrow spells. So once you get those upgraded, you'll be able to capitalize on wind damage. Magic Hammer is also very great for depleting enemies' HP. Question marks can also be essentially revenge spells. So if you have a very high HP job like the monk and you have access to blue magic, you can basically deal very high damage with this. And good news is you don't really need a whole lot of very high magic for most of these spells, since most of them will deal don't rely on the magic staff for the most part, except for the damaging ones. And of course, Dark Spark is also good for hitting enemies that are susceptible to instant death attacks. It makes them more susceptible for level 5 death casting. Toad, where's that one song? I just went past it just now. Pawn's chorus is also pretty good because you can also use that against Gorloga. Can't even say it for the life of me. And that can, if you can cast Silence on it, you can basically stop it from reapplying Toad on itself to get it back on its feet. But overall, most of the blue magic you see here is going to be very useful throughout Four Job Fiesta run. It's even better if you can get access to Beastmaster as one of the jobs with it too. But overall, in my opinion, the blue mage is actually pretty darn good. Rob Rankin is extremely good early game until you get access to the Yaga spells. And that's pretty much it for my tier list. I'll have this posted up a little bit later today. And I will, as I mentioned before, I will be back to doing Xenoblade Chronicles X around 6 p.m. later today. And I will catch you all later. You all take care, and I will see you all next time. This is RotorStorm331 signing off. Have a great day. Take care, and I will see you all next time.